Have you ever felt completely abandoned? Cast aside by society, family, friends, everyone who once knew your name? Imagine waking up one morning to discover patches of discolored skin that won't heal, watching in horror as sensation slowly leaves your fingers and toes, and then hearing the devastating verdict that will forever change your life. Unclean. In ancient Israel, these 6 letters were a death sentence, not of the body, but of the soul. The story of the 10 lepers isn't just a tale from dusty scrolls. It's about what happens when desperation meets hope, when outcasts dare to believe, and when one moment of faith changes everything. In this video, we're stepping into one of Jesus' most powerful encounters, a story about 10 men who lived as walking ghosts, banished from everything they loved, until a chance meeting with the Messiah changed their lives forever. But only one returned to say thank you, and his gratitude revealed something far more precious than physical healing. Stay with me, because what happened to these 10 men could completely transform how you view your own struggles and healing journey. To understand this story, we need to feel what leprosy meant in first-century Judea. Imagine the horror of watching your own body betray you, skin erupting in white, scaly patches that refuse to heal, fingers and toes gradually losing sensation until you could place your hand in fire and feel nothing. The disease didn't just attack your body, it systematically destroyed your entire life. The moment someone was diagnosed with leprosy, they were stripped of everything. The priest would tear their clothes, symbolizing that they were dead to society. They were forced to leave their homes, their families, their livelihoods, everything they had ever known or loved. Picture a father watching his children from a distance, unable to touch them as they grew. A husband forced to abandon his wife. A craftsman with skills now useless as his fingers, slowly curled and withered. Beyond the physical torment was the crushing spiritual burden. In a culture where illness was often viewed as divine punishment, lepers carried the stigma of being cursed by God. Their very existence was considered an offense. To society, to religious purity, to God himself. The law was brutally clear. The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. Can you feel the weight of those words? They must live alone. Complete isolation, total rejection. The 10 men in our story didn't just share a disease, they shared a living nightmare. On the outskirts of villages throughout Galilee and Judea, leper colonies formed, communities of the condemned. Our 10 men found each other this way, banding together not by choice, but by desperate necessity. The sun beat down mercilessly on their makeshift camp outside a nameless village between Samaria and Galilee. Their shelters, if you could call them that, were crude structures of branches and scraps of cloth. The stench of unwashed bodies and festering wounds hung in the air. Among them was Simon, once a respected merchant from Jerusalem. His fingers were now clawed, making it impossible to count coins or write ledgers. Next to him sat Nathanael, a former farmer whose face had become so disfigured that his own children had screamed in terror the last time they glimpsed him from afar. Most surprising of all was Adnan, a Samaritan. Under normal circumstances, Jews would never associate with Samaritans, considered religious heretics and cultural enemies. But leprosy erased those boundaries. When you're at rock bottom, prejudice becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. Their daily routine was a grim ritual of survival. Each morning they positioned themselves along the road leading to the village, keeping the required distance, far enough to comply with the law, close enough to beg from travelers. Their raspy voices called out in unison, "Alms for the unclean! Have mercy!" Most travelers hurried past, averting their eyes, holding cloth to their faces, tossing the occasional scrap of bread or coin that would land in the dust. The lepers would scramble for these meager offerings like starving dogs. But physical hunger was nothing compared to their starvation for human connection. To never feel the warmth of a loving touch, to never again be looked in the eye with anything but disgust or pity, Some days the isolation hurt more than the disease itself, yet something kept them going. Whispers had been traveling through the countryside, stories of a teacher, a miracle worker from Nazareth, a man who touched the untouchable, a healer who restored the hopeless. His name was Jesus. The day began like any other. The relentless sun, the gnawing hunger, the ritual humiliation of begging. But then Adnan, the Samaritan, came running back to their camp, breathless with excitement. "He's coming! The Nazarene is coming! He's on the road to Jerusalem!" The news electrified their desolate camp. They had heard the rumors, the blind seeing, the paralyzed walking, even lepers cleansed. But could it be true? And even if it was, would this miracle worker bother with them? Doubt and hope clashed violently in their hearts. Simon, his voice bitter from years of disappointment, scoffed. "And why would he help us? Look at us. We're cursed by God." Nathanael's eyes, however, gleamed with desperate hope. "What do we have to lose? We're already dead to the world." The debate raged through their camp. Some feared raising their hopes only to have them crushed again. Others worried about breaking the law. They were forbidden to approach healthy people. What if they angered the authorities? What if they angered God? But Adnan stood firm. "I don't care if he's Jewish and I'm Samaritan. I don't care about the law. If there's even the smallest chance..." His voice trailed off as he locked eyes with each man in turn. One by one, determination replaced despair on their ravaged faces. Decision made, they moved toward the road where Jesus would pass. Their bodies ached with each step, but something stronger than pain drove them forward. Hope. Terrible, wonderful hope. As they positioned themselves at the required distance from the road, they could see a crowd in the distance, dust rising from many feet. At its center walked a man in simple robes, nothing to distinguish him from any other traveler except for the crowd that followed his every step. This was their moment, perhaps their only chance. As the crowd drew closer, panic gripped the 10 men. What if he ignored them? What if he turned away in disgust like everyone else? They had agreed to call out together. Their combined voices might be heard above the crowd. But when the moment came, their parched throats tightened with fear. It was Adnan who found his voice first, crying out with all the strength left in his disease-ravaged body. "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us!" The others joined in, their desperate chorus rising above the murmur of the crowd. "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us!" The crowd parted like water around a stone. Conversation died. All eyes turned toward the source of those anguished cries. And then, the miracle. The man in the center of the crowd stopped. He turned toward them. Jesus looked directly at them, not past them, not through them, at them. For men who had been invisible to society for years, this simple act of acknowledgement was already enough to bring tears to their eyes. When was the last time someone had truly seen them? The crowd drew back, maintaining safe distance. Even Jesus' disciples seemed uncomfortable. But Jesus himself stood calm. His eyes filled not with revulsion, but with something none of the 10 men had seen directed at them in years: compassion. In that moment, something passed between them and the Nazarene, an unspoken understanding of suffering, a recognition of their humanity that the world had long denied them. Then Jesus spoke, his voice neither loud nor dramatic, yet carrying effortlessly to where they stood. "Go, show yourselves to the priests." That was all. No dramatic gestures, no laying on of hands, no immediate transformation. Just a simple command that, to anyone familiar with Jewish law, carried profound significance. According to Levitical law, only a priest could declare a leper clean and restore them to society. Jesus was telling them to act as if they were already healed. Can you believe that? The 10 men exchanged bewildered glances. Go to the priests, looking like this? It made no sense. Or did it? Was this a test of faith? Nathanael was the first to turn toward Jerusalem, where the temple priests served. "What do we have to lose?" he whispered again. One by one, they turned and began the journey, not yet healed but choosing to believe. They walked in silence, every step an act of faith, or perhaps of desperation. Some limped badly, others had to rest frequently as the disease had weakened their bodies. But something drove them forward. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when Nathanael suddenly stopped, staring at his hands. "Look," he gasped. The others gathered around him, watching in amazement as the white, scaly patches on his skin began to fade like morning mist under the rising sun. Color returned to the dead, waxy flesh, healthy, pink, alive. Simon felt a tingling in his fingertips, sensation returning to nerves long dead. He flexed fingers that had been clawed for years, now straightening with ease. The transformation swept through all 10 men like wildfire. Infected skin renewed, feeling returned, strength flowed back into wasted muscles. They touched their faces, finding smooth skin where there had been disfigurement. They breathed deeply, lungs clear and strong. They looked at each other and saw not the monsters they had become, but the men they once were. Their disbelief gave way to jubilation. Tears streamed down newly healed faces. Men who had shuffled now leaped. Voices that had been used only for begging now shouted with joy. For 9 of them, the immediate reaction was clear. Continue to Jerusalem as Jesus had instructed. Show themselves to the priests. Be officially declared clean. Return to their families, their homes, their lives. They quickened their pace, energized by healing and the prospect of reunion with everything they had lost. But Adnan the Samaritan stopped. In the midst of his joy, something else tugged at his heart, a compelling need to return to the one who had made this miracle possible. "Where are you going?" the others called as he turned back. "To thank him," Adnan replied simply. The others hesitated only briefly. "The priest first," Simon insisted. "That's what he told us to do." Adnan watched them hurry toward Jerusalem, their formerly stooped figures growing smaller in the distance. Then he turned and ran, actually ran, back the way they had come. Adnan's heart pounded with each step, not from exertion, but from overwhelming gratitude. His mind raced with questions. Who was this man who could command disease to flee with just a word? How could he ever express what this healing meant? When he spotted Jesus and his disciples still on the road, Adnan couldn't contain himself. He shouted for joy, drawing curious stares from travelers. But he didn't care. For years he had been required to announce his shame by calling out unclean. Now he proclaimed his liberation with every fiber of his being. Reaching Jesus, Adnan fell at his feet, his face pressed to the dusty ground, his arms outstretched in total submission and gratitude. Between sobs of joy, he poured out praise, not just to the healer, but to the God of Israel. Thank you, thank you. Blessed be the name of the Lord God who has shown mercy. Jesus looked down at the former leper, his expression a mixture of joy and something else, a quiet sadness. He turned to his disciples and asked a question that hangs in the air even today. Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? The weight of those words settled on those present. 10 men healed, 1 man grateful, and not just any man, a Samaritan, considered an outsider to God's covenant. Then Jesus reached down and did something remarkable. He touched Adnan. It was a simple gesture, but for a man who had been untouchable for years, it was overwhelming. "Rise and go," Jesus said gently. "Your faith has made you well." Those watching might have been confused. Hadn't all 10 been made well? What did Jesus mean? But Adnan understood. The others had received healing of the body. He had received something more, a healing of the soul. In his gratitude, he had found not just physical restoration, but spiritual wholeness. As Adnan rose to his feet, he knew his life would never be the same. Not just because his leprosy was gone, but because he had encountered the living God face to face. Let's pause here and consider one of the most powerful aspects of this story, something that could revolutionize your faith journey today. When Jesus told these 10 lepers, "Go, show yourselves to the priests," he was asking them to do something remarkable. He was telling them to act as if they were already healed, when their bodies still bore every mark of disease. Remember, in that time, only a priest could declare someone clean from leprosy. By telling them to go to the priests, Jesus was essentially saying, Act as if what you're praying for has already happened. Think about the courage this required. Can you imagine walking toward the temple, their diseased bodies still visible to everyone they passed, acting as if they were already whole? Every step was a declaration of faith before there was any physical evidence to support it. And here's the miracle. As they went, they were cleansed. The healing didn't come while they waited for Jesus to touch them. It didn't come while they stayed in their familiar leper colony waiting for proof. It came as they walked in obedience, acting on faith rather than sight. This reveals a powerful principle that echoes throughout Scripture. Sometimes God asks us to act as if our prayers are already answered, not as a mind trick or self-deception, but as a profound act of faith. When Joshua led Israel around Jericho, they had to march before the walls fell. When Peter stepped out of the boat, he had to put his foot over the edge before experiencing the miracle of walking on water. When the widow in Elisha's time faced crushing debt, she had to collect empty jars before seeing them filled with oil. God often invites us into this sacred space between promise and fulfillment, where our actions demonstrate that we truly believe what He says. What are you believing God for today? Healing in your body, restoration in your marriage, freedom from addiction, breakthrough in your finances. Whatever it is, perhaps God is asking you the same question. He asked these lepers, "Will you act as if you believe my promise is already in motion?" This isn't about denying reality or ignoring problems. The lepers didn't deny their condition. They just chose to act on Jesus' word rather than their circumstances. They chose to walk toward their miracle before they could see it. When you begin to pray as if God has already answered, give thanks as if the blessing is already yours, and take steps of faith as if the promise is already fulfilled. Something supernatural happens. Faith becomes the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. What happened to the 10 lepers after their healing? Scripture doesn't tell us directly, but we can imagine. The 9 who continued to Jerusalem were undoubtedly declared clean by the priests. They returned to their families, resumed their trades, rebuilt their lives. Physical healing gave them back everything leprosy had stolen. But for Adnan, something deeper had transformed. His healing led to an encounter with the divine that changed not just his circumstances, but his heart. The story raises uncomfortable questions for all of us. How often do we, like the 9, receive blessings without acknowledging their source? How quickly do we move on once our immediate needs are met? Gratitude isn't just good manners, it's transformative. It changes how we see our circumstances, ourselves, and God. It opens our eyes to the deeper healing that's available beyond our physical needs. The 9 were healed of leprosy, but Adnan was made whole, body, mind, and spirit. His gratitude became the doorway to a deeper relationship with Jesus that the others missed entirely. What's even more striking about this story is who returned. Not a devout Jew who understood the prophecies about the Messiah. Not someone raised to worship at the temple in Jerusalem, but a Samaritan, considered a religious outcast by the Jews of Jesus' day. Sometimes those who understand they deserve nothing are the most grateful for everything. Those at the margins often recognize grace more clearly than those who feel entitled to blessing. So what does this ancient story of 10 lepers have to say to us today? First, it reminds us that everyone experiences brokenness. While we may not have leprosy, we all know what it feels like to be isolated, rejected, or in pain. Whether it's physical illness, emotional wounds, broken relationships, or spiritual emptiness, we all know what it's like to cry out, "Have mercy on me." Second, it teaches us the power of acting as if. When Jesus told the lepers to go show themselves to the priests, he was inviting them into active faith, to walk toward their miracle before they could see it. Today, God still invites us to walk by faith, not by sight, to thank him for answers that haven't materialized yet, to praise him for breakthroughs still in progress. This isn't positive thinking or wishful dreaming, it's biblical faith. It's Abraham calling himself the father of many nations while still childless. It's Jesus thanking God for hearing him before Lazarus walked out of the tomb. It's you and me standing on God's promises when everything visible contradicts them. Third, it challenges us to recognize where we might be acting like the 9. How many answers to prayer have we received without pausing to say thank you? How many blessings do we take for granted each day? The air in our lungs, the roof over our heads, the people who love us. Fourth, it invites us to choose gratitude as a way of life. Gratitude isn't dependent on circumstances. It's a decision to see God's goodness even in difficult times. Like Adnan, we can choose to return and give thanks, even when others around us hurry on to the next thing. Finally, this story reveals that Jesus notices our response. He asked, "Where are the other 9?" Not because he needed their thanks, but because he knew they needed to give it. Their healing was incomplete without gratitude. Jesus still notices today. He sees every heart that turns back to acknowledge him. He values our gratitude not because he needs it, but because it completes our healing. The most powerful truth in this story may be what Jesus said to Adnan. Your faith has made you well. The Greek word used here, sozo, means more than physical healing. It speaks of wholeness, salvation, completeness. All 10 lepers were healed physically, but only one was made whole. As we come to the end of this video, ask yourself, which of the 10 lepers am I most like? Am I quick to ask for help but slow to express gratitude? Do I take God's blessings for granted? Am I willing to act as if my prayers are already answered? To walk toward my miracle before I see it? Or do I wait for proof before I'll take a step of faith? Am I like Adnan, falling at Jesus' feet in humble thanksgiving? The beautiful truth is that Jesus still heals today. Maybe not always in the ways we expect or demand, but often in deeper, more profound ways than we could imagine. Gratitude and active faith open the door to experiencing that healing in its fullness. If you're in a place of brokenness right now, crying out like those lepers, "Jesus, Master, have mercy," know that he sees you, he hears you, and he still responds with compassion. But don't just wait passively. Act as if you believe. Walk toward your miracle. And when healing comes, don't forget to return and give thanks. Thank you for joining us on Hidden Heroes of Faith. If this message spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs encouragement today. Until next time, remember, your faith matters, gratitude transforms everything, and sometimes we need to act as if before we see the miracle.